Perfect. She's got it. She knows. All right. All right. Welcome in, everyone. Hopefully you can see that screen. I'm going to move that over. All right. This is a Great Lakes ROTA-RC webinar. This morning, we are back for part 2 of Changing Families, Changing Outcomes, a compassionate response to substance use in the family. Again, this is a joint hosted event to the University of Minnesota Extension and UW-Madison Division of Extension. So we want to just take a moment to thank our Great Lakes ROTA-RC partner universities for hosting this series. Today, we just have a couple of things that we need to go through as far as hosting. If you're here for part 1, we did most of that, so I'll kind of go through it real quickly. We want to go through our funding announcement. Again, this is a SAMHSA funded project covering HHS Region 5, which is Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. If you'd like to know more about our project, please feel free to check out our website. We'll pop that in again at the end so you can check out more about our project. The website looks some of the headings of our project look a little bit like this on the website, but overall our project focuses on virtual education. We have community tools and resources. We do technical assistance within our region, but we can get you connected to technical assistance and resources within a ROTA project within your region if you are not part of HHS Region 5. We also have newsletters and a newsletter, and we provide news and updates nationally, as well as funding announcements within our technical assistance partners. This is a little bit what our newsletter looks like, so we invite you to come check that out. We'll provide links for you to be able to do that. It is a monthly newsletter. The July newsletter should be coming out real quick here. Just a quick reminder that as we create a space of learning, we want to promote the use of affirming person-first language when discussing behavioral health disorders. We want to use non-stigmatizing, recovery-oriented language that can really help reduce negative bias and promote successful engagement in treatment and recovery for everyone. So welcome on in to Great Lakes ROTA-RC learning environment. I want to turn now to welcome again Pam Lanhart, the Thrive Family Recovery Resources founder and our presenter today. So I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to hand it over to Pam.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. And I think I need to be given permissions. Let me just.
My apologies, Pam. Give me 2 seconds. There you go, all set.
All right, let me hit the right box here. So just to kind of review, last week we talked about substance use in the family and how it impacts us. And then I also talked a little bit about the role that we play. I need to get this on the screen share here. I'm sorry, I just hit something that. There we go. All right. And we kind of talked about the different roles that we can play. Hopefully some of you did actually look at the worksheets that were attached to the first week. Sometimes this workshop can be hours long and there can be a lot of interaction, and because for the sake of time, we're not able to do some of the discussion, but we did give you some discussion questions. And so we're going to move into the second part of this, which is if we want to move out of those roles, if we don't want to be a victim, if we don't want to be a rescuer, if we don't want to sit in the place of persecution, if we want to show up compassionate, loving, and kind, how do we do that? So I just like to start this with, how do we begin to heal? You know, one of the things that happens in these conversations is this idea of powerlessness, and there's nothing you can do. I mentioned that last week. And we really think in our work that there are many things that you can do. And sometimes people will come to me and say, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that. And I'll ask them the question, what can you do? And they always come up with something. So we talked last week about strategies to just really pause, to just feel, you know, your feels, and to take time to make decisions with intention. So we're going to move through some of this today. And just start with this idea that last week we talked about how our behaviors make sense. And I was talking to my brother the other day. He works in he worked in the field for years. And, you know, he still kind of uses some of that old language of addiction is a family disease. And that we have maladaptive behaviors. And my philosophy is that for the sake of medical interventions, we have to give substance use a DSM diagnosis, but truly we pathologize something that is actually adaptation. And the adaptation of an individual because of trauma, pain, the adaptation of families because of their trauma and pain is really brilliant. It's brilliant human nature that we want to survive. And so many of us are in survival mode, which is why we end up protecting ourselves in different ways. And when we can recognize that in our own lives, we can often recognize that in the lives of other people, which then allows us to show up safe and compassionate. You know, these are questions that often come up when families talk to me. Why is he doing this, right? Probably all of you that have been impacted have thought one of these things. This doesn't make sense. Why doesn't he just stop? And I find the dynamic especially difficult in families where one person might be in recovery, and there might be a little judgment on that. If I can do it, they can do it. So we look from the outside, especially from the perspective of family members, caregivers, people that love, and we think to ourselves, how could they walk away from their child? How could they continue to do this? We will put judgment on that, like, when are they going to hit rock bottom? And so oftentimes all of our behaviors are ordered by, you know, them hitting rock bottom. We leverage relationship thinking that rock bottom is something that they need to hit in order to change. And so a lot of the conditioning that we've received in our society is really about forcing change. And we're going to talk a little bit about how people change and why that's a really bad idea. But of course, you think, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this to us? And I mentioned this last week. They speak of my drinking, but not of my thirst. So we talk about substance use behaviors as a failure, or as selfish, or as a personal attack. This is a little bit of a review, and it really isn't. Right? They don't think about us in the way that we think that they're thinking about us. They're not really thinking about us at all. And I was talking to a parent of a youngster, like 16 years old, and he has trauma, right? He's adopted. They have 4 kids in their family. 3 of them are adopted. And there's been significant pain. And so we think about the behaviors and substance use and why they're using. And it always starts with a pain point. And I want to just sort of call out some of the work that's out there. And I love Gabor Mate for the most part. I really agree with most of what he says. And yet, when the word trauma comes up, a lot of parents will get prickly about that. Family members will think that the implication is that they were the cause of their trauma, and that trauma is always the cause of addiction. And Gabor Mate comes right out and says that. And I think it's a lot simpler than that, and maybe a lot smaller than that, because we all have behaviors where we use certain things to feel better. And so for my son, it was when I feel like I don't fit in, I can smoke this weed in the bathroom and now I feel a lot better. When I have physical pain, I'm at the end of a long day and I'm trying to sleep, I can maybe have one drink and I'll sleep better. When I feel anxious and I'm worrying about what's going on in my family, I can take this Xanax pill and all of a sudden my anxiety goes away. And if you think about it, these are immediate benefits to substance use. We want to think that substance use is bad. We, again, put a judgment on that, like what they're doing is bad. And when we don't acknowledge the fact that what they're doing helps them, they perceive it, someone using substances perceives it as judgment. And really, we're all that way. You know, when I feel lonely, I can go out, have a few drinks with my friends, and now I'm the life of the party. So this is an instant reinforcement and reward in this. And what happens with family members is that because of that judgment and because the label of this is bad, we start to react to that, and it pushes us farther apart and disconnects us. And so we're, in essence, we're competing. If you think about it, we're competing with the good feelings that they get from the substances. And if we start to shame or blame or tell or nag or complain or confront, why would they want to be around us when they can go, you know, out, have a drink and feel better? So we talk a lot about getting out of that bad guy role. The first thing we have to do is stop nagging, complaining, pushing, you know, confronting this, constantly talking about the substance use, constantly talking about it. Because if I'm in that position of telling and confronting, they're going to just pull away from that because they have a substance that's going to accept them unconditionally. And why would they not do that? Now, I know many of you are just thinking, but there are long-term consequences, and like there are, and we're going to get to how to deal with that at the end of, towards the end of this today. But we have to remember that in the immediate, this is really beneficial for them and really helpful for them. And oftentimes our brain doesn't really register long-term consequences. We just know that this is the way it wants to feel. So, you know, what happens, and this is a really quick summary, I think I mentioned this, the amygdala is activated, the limbic system, they go into survival mode, and your brain remembers those neural pathways. So we're creating those same neural pathways. So thinking in terms of your loved one, what's behind that why? And when we can understand what's behind the why, we can often connect with someone because it helps us get it out of the place of judgment and into the place of empathy. Johann Hari says the opposite of addiction is connection. Right? And I think the antidote for addiction, or really almost anything in our lives, is connection. We can be introverts and still we're created to be in connection with other people. And I really love Robert Weiss's book, Codependency, because it talks about the fact that we cannot live apart from community and connection. And so what we're trying to do is compete with the connection to the drugs, interrupt that connection to build relationship, because in relationship, we have influence. And so when we think about how can I influence use, how can I interrupt use, how can we compete with it, it really is all about relationship. I remember long ago sitting in front of a pastor one time asking about my son, and he looked at me and he said, are you going to be right for the sake of justice, or are you going to love for the sake of relationship? And at some point you have to move out of that place of being right and changing our way of being into a way of being that is less judgmental, more kind, more compassionate, and safe. So the question always becomes, how are we going to show up? Right? And this work, and I just mentioned this, becomes about how we respond and intention. I love this quote by Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power. And our power is to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. So really what this ends up being about is what I call self-efficacy, our own self-efficacy first. So we're in a trauma response, we're activated, and we have to ask ourselves, who are we and how do we want to show up? So this is a great definition of self-efficacy, which is, what are our beliefs? What are our intentions? Are they aligned? So do our behaviors support our intentions? And then self-reflection is the process of living authentically. Am I in alignment? And so when we went to that, Pastor, the reason we went is because I wanted to be a kind, compassionate, loving mother. My son was 17 years old, and I did not want to disconnect from that relationship. And so what was happening in our home was that the way I was showing up wasn't who I wanted to be. I was activated, I was confrontational, literally out of my mind, you know, and this changed my life. And I just want to, if there's, you know, a process to this whole thing, one of the greatest things that we can do is the work of core values and how are we going to show up. So there's a worksheet in your in the link that's provided, and it really is about our core values, right? So the question with core values is, what are the most important things in my life? If you were at your 80th birthday party and someone was eulogizing you or honoring you, I guess, you know, what would you want them to say about you? And, you know, is it maybe that you valued your faith? Is it that you valued relationship? Is it that you valued, I mean, for us, one of our highest values in our family is adventure, and we combined adventure and relationship. And so the question becomes, and we always have these really good intentions, and then because of our own trauma, that goes out the door. And so this is where this practicing the pause makes such a big difference. So how do you do that? I want to show up as a loving, kind human. Now, loving is a very big word that can be very subjective. So I like to think of it more specifically. What does loving look like? It might mean being compassionate. It might mean being empathetic. It might mean being kind. It might mean using affirming and validating language. And so when I'm activated, when I'm in my trauma response, the first thing I want to do is hit that pause button and be aware. So we talked a little bit about this last week, but when we're activated, we go into our own survival mode, and we just respond, we just react, right? It's because there are neural pathways that have been created, it's super easy for us to just do things without even thinking about them. And then justify them later, right? I did that because you did this. And of course, we're going to talk about that language of getting, not making accusations or not getting defensive. But the first thing we have to do is be aware in our body and really decide what matters to us. And I'm assuming that you're all here because you want to show up differently in your relationships with your loved ones. So we talk in our work about recovery, and I'm going to get into a little bit about what recovery is for us, which as defined in the dictionary and the family circles, I like to use this because oftentimes when a family comes to me, they're like, I don't need to be in recovery. I don't have a problem with drinking. It's not my problem. And so I always think about recovering our health and well-being. That's how I like to describe recovery to the family. And honestly, I have family members that have kids that, even though they may have been through some sort of treatment, still recoil at the word recovery. And I think it's a great word, but I think we have to define it in a way that people can digest it. And for me, that looks like a return to a normal state of health, mind, or strength, or an action of regaining something that we have that has been stolen or lost from us. So in the family recovery circles, when we think about this, we adapt, as I mentioned earlier, we're creatures of adaptation. And so, we adapt to the environment around us and we want to protect ourselves. And that can become unhealthy. And what this looks like for one person is different than for another person. No one size fits all. So I don't like to put any kind of definition of what that means for a family member. I'm going to ask them. I'm going to ask them what have they lost in the process of substance use, and what do they want to regain for their own health and well-being, right? And I kind of laugh about this, but in most cases they would say, this is what it looks like. We think that recovery is linear, but in reality, it's 10 steps, it might be 1 step forward, 10 steps back. And so reminding families that this process is not linear. And then, of course, we use the 4 pillars of recovery, whether it's for a family or an individual, because they can appreciate this. And as we work with families, we model what recovery is going to look like for them. So I use the same ideology or the same evidence-based practices that you would use with someone who is activating their recovery. And because it's person-centered and no one size fits all, we talk about this. And we talk about it in relationship to the 8 dimensions of wellness. Now, you all have seen this, but when a family member is pondering, what have I lost? What do I need to regain? Kind of the prompts and cues we'll look at are these 8 dimensions of wellness. Because in most instances, our families would report that they have lost more than one of these things. That we stop exercising because, we're stopping everything in order to help our loved one, or we're too tired, or we isolate, right? So our community, we have stopped being social creatures and we're living in isolation. Maybe, and this is a typical one in the 8 dimensions of wellness, it would be our financial well-being. I have spent so much money helping my loved one that I have no retirement any longer. And then maybe I can't show up for my job because I'm losing sleep at night. So typically, if we start to really talk about all of these areas of wellness with a family member, they'll be like, yes, I have lost that. I do, if I were to rate myself on a linear scale, 1 to 5, I'm a 1 or a 2 in almost all of these areas. So thinking about what we're a return to wellness, and if you guys look at the 4 pillars of recovery, and even the idea of safe and stable housing. So we want to make an assumption when we work with family members that their home is safe, and oftentimes it's not. And we're going to talk a little bit about boundaries later, but that might be the first thing. And even emotionally, sometimes in the family system, I have resorted to perhaps extremes. So maybe I am an over cleaner, and that's almost an OCD type behavior, or maybe I'm a hoarder, and those are ways that my behaviors make sense to me. There are things that happen in my life that comfort me, and so now my home isn't really safe. Or maybe someone is living in their home that is in extreme active use and causing problematic behaviors, and that might be the first place that we look to make some changes or set some goals. So we have a family recovery action plan. And then as you can see on the worksheet, we're going to ask them and take them through these exercises. Where would you rate yourself? What is the lowest? Where do we want to start here? And all of these things are intertwined. So then when we look at the 4 pillars of recovery, home health, do I have proper mental health services? Am I working with a therapist? Peer support is non-clinical, so we will make sure that when we work with a family that we're staying in our scope of practice and refer them out. And oftentimes we're going to refer them to a trauma therapy because and this is when you look at historically with families, if you start to, through conversation, explore their history, chances are they've probably had historical trauma because there has probably been someone in their family that has used substances in their history or suffered from mental illness. And so one thing that kind of happens is we have to explain how we can bring that generational trauma into the family. And that's another whole workshop, right? Genograms and looking at generational historical trauma. And so, you know, thinking about that health part of it, and then community and a sense of purpose and mission, which could come from many of these different things, spiritually, physically. But what happens is that most families would report that really their mission has become rescuing or saving their loved one. And we're going to try to balance that out. Again, because you love your person, it does not make you codependent. I don't use that word in my work. You love your person and it makes you human. So this exercise in our packet, if you want to take that home with you and just ask yourself, or you can use it with permissions, just keep our logo and our copyright on the bottom of it, but you can use it and just, you know, ask yourself, where do I need to grow? What has this addiction cost me? And you know, one thing I want to say is some of you might be clinicians that are also working with people that have comorbidities. They might have an eating disorder. They might be presenting more with mental health issues. This work is just as effective with mental health concerns. Everything that we do here, you can remove the word addiction and put in the word eating disorder or bipolar disorder or borderline personality or schizoaffective disorders. You know, really, if we look at it, it's really what has your loved ones, you know, behaviors cost you, right? And how have you responded to that in a way that has created a deficit in your own life? So there's a great workshop. Ask yourself those questions. And I'm not going to ask you right now, but think about that and fill that out when you get home. And where can you start? Oftentimes, I will ask family members to just start with something really small. So they might say, I can't do that. I can't ask them to leave, right? And I said, I have said multiple times, there's a long distance between all and nothing. And so we don't have to jump to, you have to remove them from your home. It could be that you set a boundary that says you just have to be home by 10 o'clock. And if you're not, we're going to lock the doors. So how do people change? And this is really helpful. Both, so I use this, all of our staff, which we have 7 staff, are trained in stages of change, motivational interviewing, helping people recognize that they can change. And one of the most important relearning things that we do, or unlearning and then relearning, is that there's an ideology that you know, nobody changes unless they're ready, they're willing, and we can't change anybody. And you know, already that my answer to all of that is yes. And yes, we have to, we cannot, you know, we cannot make someone change, but we can create the conditions that support change. And we can help someone move through the change process. That's what MI is all about. So understanding the process of change is really important. And I'm not going to go through each one of these stages right now, but what I will say about this is in every stage, the skills of motivational interviewing work beautifully. So what happens in a family, and it really happens a lot because of shows like Intervention, is people will say pre-contemplation is denial. I need to get them out of denial, and then we're going to force them to jump to action. And when you do that and you force someone into a position of action through leveraging, a complete cutoff in communications, they might extrinsically go to treatment, but they haven't intrinsically gone through that process of change. So we skip from pre-contemplation all the way to action, and then we wonder why treatment doesn't work, right? Because they haven't gone through the process. And the process is really important. And when we're working with families, that same process holds true, right? So thinking in terms of the communication skills in these stages of change, we're going to go through the process of MI in the language of families. And in every single one of these, reflection, validation, one of the things that's really unnatural for a family member is especially as a parent of a loved one that may be experimenting with marijuana, they're like, hey, but it helps me. And we're really afraid to ask how it helps them. Why? So what I'm hearing you say is that you really like the way the marijuana feels for you. Can you tell me more about what that does for you? And sometimes through the curiosity and the questioning, we can find out really what's behind the why. Why are they using? Well, my friends are all using and it really helps me to fit in. It helps me to relax. It really helps my pain at night. And when we start to understand again why, it gets us out of that place of judgment. Contemplative stage, and I like to remind family members of how they go through their own stages of change in, everything in our lives, right? So if you think about a change that you made and you want to think about how you made it, you can identify every single step in that process. So I want to get healthy, so I want to start an exercise plan, and it takes me a while to start that plan. Like I have to, I've started, stopped. I've been miserable. Finally, when I'm miserable enough, I'm thinking about changing, and then I might look up some exercise plans. Do I do couch to 5K? Or do I do, 10,000 steps? Or do I do the Apple Watch rings? And so I'm My Fitness Pal. So I'm thinking about the change, and then I'm preparing for it by deciding which one I want to go through. And then the action step is that I start, right? And through this whole process, imagine if you were trying to make a big change in your life and you didn't have any support whatsoever. So thinking in terms of your own life and these stages of change, what is one thing that you wanted to change and couldn't? What is that intrinsic motivation? And what is most helpful in the process of change? So I want to ask you guys, and you can throw this into the chat. So thinking about a change that you wanted to make, and thinking about a person in your life that was super helpful in helping you work through that change process, and what were some of those qualities and characters? So if you want to just throw some of those qualities and characteristics in the chat box, what was most helpful when you were making that change? So if you guys have the opportunity, just some of those things that might be most helpful. You guys can go ahead and put them in the chat box if you want. Help me out here. Participatory. When you tried to make a change, okay, support and encouragement, community, direct honesty, positive support, right? And then there are some things that aren't helpful, right? So what was least helpful in that process for you? So, you look at nagging, So a true friend that was available, and so that means non-judgment, or like Lori said, you should. Because of course, in the change process, when someone has been struggling with substances, we want to jump in and give them the 4-point process of how they need to get help and what they need to do. And so going back to the idea of self-efficacy, an agency in these decisions, what was really important, and I saw this in the chat box, was that you figured out for yourself how you wanted to do this, and someone came along side of you without judgment, without shame, without blame, without telling you what to do, and they just walked with you through that. So when you ask yourself, how do I want to show up? Think about what's most helpful when you've gone through that process of change. And then identifying those character qualities that are most helpful, right? And then creating this environment. So I'm going to mention a little bit about change talk here. When we talk about how we move through change, and how we can help bring about change in a family system, we have to listen for change talk. And even though some of you might work in the field and you think this is sort of a therapeutic methodology, I have a community that has about 7,800 members in it. And honestly, every day somebody says, oh, I think I heard change talk in my loved one. So what happens is we want to tell someone what to do, and we're not listening for their statements that they might be considering making a change. So getting families to think about I'm hearing that there is change talk. So, we will label change talk actually as not being ready or denial, but if we flip the script on it, it's that they're considering it. I think when we can hear change talk in somebody, it's magical, right? So that might look something like, well, I know I want to be a better mother, and yeah, of course I want to get my daughter back. Of course. It's just really hard. And in a family system, the response to that might be, well, yeah, like you're never going to get your daughter back if you don't stop using. Now, is that going to bring about change? Or is it going to shut down change and shut down relationship? And so that's a change talk statement. Another example, Mom, this marijuana, it makes me feel like I fit in. I know it's not really great for me, and I don't really like the way my clothes smell, but I have more friends now because I smoke, right? That's change talk. There's change talk in there. And so recognizing that change talk and responding in a way that doesn't shut it down is one of the easiest ways to form connection. And then sometimes we can identify that intrinsic motivation. So in the first example, the intrinsic motivation for that woman's change was to get her kids back. And so we call those motivational hooks, and we can use those. We can leverage them as family. I hear you say you want to get your daughter back, and I think that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I love your heart. I love that you want to get your daughter back. We want that for you too. What would that look like for you? So instead of shutting it down and saying, well, yeah, your kiddo needs a mom, because we can, especially when we're close to somebody and we always kind of hurt the people that we love the most. And I think that in substance use, especially, and addiction in the family, we're so focused on how they're hurting us that we're not focusing on how we might be harming them. And so, of course, we call this harm reduction because we're stepping out of that language that can cause harm, shame, or blame. Your loved one already knows that her daughter is suffering because of her addiction. We don't have to remind them of that. We don't have to paraphrase that part. And so we want to create this environment that supports change. And so again, we can shut it down by interrupting, by lecturing. You know, someone mentioned this, the shoulds, or like, well, this is what I did. And this is especially notable in families where someone else is in recovery, or someone's coming alongside of them that's in recovery, and they think that their pathway is the best pathway, right? And so we know how we change. We think that's going to work for everybody else. You know, reminding them of past failures. So here's an example. You know, well, I've heard this before. You've said this already 100 times. What are you going to do different? Yeah, you said that last week and you're already using again. You know, so we can shame them in this whole process, and we just want to step out of some of that shaming language. So, you know, I love this. This is common language now in our culture, holding space for another person. The first step is to just become safe. And that goes back to aligning with our values. And I love these affirming statements, these validating statements. One of the things I always talk about is how my parents were very invalidating. You know, if you don't stop crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about. Right? Well, you know, just stop it. Have you ever seen the Bob Newhart little role? You know, I'm feeling really bad right now about this. And Bob Newhart says, I've got an answer for you. And she says, what is it? I'm going to write it down. And he said, just stop it. Just stop it, stop it, stop it. You know, and just check out the clip. It's super funny, but you know, we want to make it stop. And so we jump into problem solving rather than just validating that they're suffering. And maybe that means just holding their hand. You know, when was the last time you touched your loved one who is in active substance use? Maybe it's just reaching over and putting your hand on their hand. Maybe it's rubbing their shoulders. So our first step in holding space is sometimes it's just quiet. Sometimes it's, wow, that does sound hard. One of the things I've learned about validating is that it doesn't mean we agree. It doesn't mean we have to understand. What I do think is that we can acknowledge and empathize from a place of our own pain, even if it's not the same. But what we don't want to do is say, yeah, that sounds really hard. I know. And then we turn it around and put it on me, on us, right? Well, you know, I had a really hard day too, and here's what I went through. And sometimes we can twist things and really put it back on us and make it about us again. You know, well, I know this is hard for you, but you don't know how hard it is for me. But the word but negates everything that you said right before the but. So when we work with families and do family meetings and we're doing communication skills, you know, we take the word but out. It's and. You know, so these are the core components of motivational interviewing: partnership, acceptance, compassion, and evocation. I think that K should be a C, evocation. But we want to bring out their agency. We want to show compassion. We want to be a partner in their process and practice radical acceptance. And I mean, you know, radical. Like, I have families that their loved ones will talk really openly about their use because they know that their family members will not shame them in that. And if you're curious about what that looks like, I love dialectical behavioral therapy. Practicing radical acceptance is the process of this is what it is. And I need to accept that this is where things are at right now. I had a mom come to group one time and just share that her win for the week was that when her son called, he said, "Mom, do you know that there's a number I can text? And if I text that number, someone will come and bring me naloxone and fentanyl test strips and sterile needles." And the mom, who had only been in our group for a couple of weeks, said that she responded by saying, "Wow, I am so glad that you're taking care of your health," which was a complete practice of radical acceptance and non-judgment. And so if we're going to change in our family, we really have to step out of that. There's an exercise in your packet with some examples of how you can respond to change talk. We're not going to go through that today, but we just have to keep in mind that every person wants to feel heard, seen, safe, included, affirmed. These are common desires. I did 3 family meetings last week, and that was not typical. But when I asked the kiddos, what was important to you? What makes you feel safe? They all said, when I feel heard, when I feel seen, when I feel accepted and I don't feel judged. So really, if we always go back to this, we're going to be okay. Like, there are just some things, little things that we can do in this whole process that will radically change your relationship with your loved one. And to be heard, to stop talking and listen, to be affirmed. Touch is a big one. To be chosen, and this is something that, we don't want to chase our loved ones necessarily. I think that sometimes family members can get overly focused on, looking for their loved one, monitoring their loved one. But to be chosen might mean to say, "I see you in this, and I love you, and, no matter what you do, I'm here for you." So I'm gonna go through these skills really quickly, and then we're gonna end here and finish up next week on the rest of the presentation. But I always say that we have superpowers. And if you are familiar with motivational interviewing, you might recognize this process. But when we work with families, if you're a family member, this can be very, very simply adapted to how I interact with my family. And superpower number 1 is listening with empathy. So how you say things matters, what you don't say matters. I'm going to be quiet. There's a book called How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen and Listen So Your Kids Will Talk. And the first step is listening. So when I have a family that I'm working with and the individual who is struggling is in that meeting, I will always give them the voice first so that they feel heard. And so this could be body posture. This could be, we have these phones and we're tied to these phones. When my daughter comes down and wants to talk to me, I put the phone away. I put my laptop away. I look at her in the eyes, removing distractions. So making room for kindness and compassion. Skill number 2 is what I even modeled in that change talk example, which is reflecting and validating. And when I do a family meeting, I actually teach them how to do that and make them do that in every statement. So the family member might say, what feels safe for me is when you text me at the end of a night and let me know when you're coming home. And then I will I will have the individual reflect that. What I heard you say is that what feels safe for you is that you would like me to text you and let you know when I'm coming home, right? And these are just reflective statements. If you're just reconnecting with your loved one and you're not, sitting down for like a orchestrated conversation, you can still do this very casually. So, I heard you say in that you wanted to be a good mom. Or they might come to you with a problem, right? I ran out of money this week and I don't have any money to buy groceries. Oh, you ran out of money this week and you don't have any money to buy groceries. That sounds really hard. That would be really frustrating. Now, sometimes when you're just trying to reconnect with somebody, just doing this is enough. If every person just practiced reflecting and validating, we would reconnect with our loved ones for the most part. Now, I know that some people's loved ones are using substances that are very problematic and might create paranoia, psychosis, and they may come back at you and maybe verbally, really abuse you. And in that, you set a boundary and you hang up the phone. But you can even do this via text. I ask my families to start this via text message. A lot of kids, that's all they do that now is just text. So they might say, wow, that sounds really hard. I'm sorry that you're struggling right now. Or, you're short of money this month. That sounds really hard. So we can just simply repeat what the person says or part of what the person says. What we want to be careful of is not injecting opinions or our narrative in this. It has to be just very objective and non-judgmental. And then validating, it's so easy to invalidate. My daughter will come downstairs and say, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. And everything in me wants to say, how can you be tired? You just slept for 3 hours in the middle of the afternoon. And instead, I just have to say, wow, sorry you're tired. I bet you're tired. You worked really late last night. I'd be tired too. And then we can move into the affirmation piece of this, which I love this quote by my dear friend, Mark Pimsler. And he says, we cannot be in the business of fixing people. Instead, we must be in the business of walking people back home to themselves. Because I don't believe in brokenness. What I do believe in is forgetfulness. I believe the worst bedevilment a human can face is forgetting who they are. And I've heard this, I've heard the phrase, sing the song of your person's soul when they have forgotten how to sing it for themselves. And affirmations is remembering who they are, reminding them of who they are. And there is always something we can affirm about someone. Well, I don't have any money left because I just gave my last $10 to my buddy because he just needed money to buy, groceries. Wow, you are a really good friend. One of the things I love about you is how generous you are. So even in the worst scenarios, we can find something to remind them of who they are. We all need that. I need that. When I feel like a failure as a parent because I've just messed up, or I have a mother that calls me because they feel like they just failed, what I can say is, and you called me. And that means you care. That makes you a really loving mother. Using those affirmations are so important. And then I'm going to go to number 4 and 5, and then we're going to end it for today. Number 4 is asking those open-ended questions, empowering them. So we can use words like, I'm curious, what have you thought you could do? I'm wondering, have you checked with this person? I'm wondering what you've tried already. Can you help me understand? And remember, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So we can say, well, help me understand this. And we can say it in a really snarky way, or we can say, I'm curious. Can you explain more about what did happen? I just got kicked out of sober living, and everything in us wants to react to that. And we can say, huh, that sounds really hard. Can you help me understand what happened? And I know how hard it is to react that way. And that's where we go back to the pause. That's where we go back to agency. That's where we go back to self-efficacy. And then finally, and the last one is gaining consent. And I love this phrase, do you want to be heard, helped, or hugged? Sometimes people just want to vent and they don't want your help. And so really just asking permission. Are you interested in hearing my thoughts on this? Do you want to know my feedback? Do you mind if I share a thought on this? And so we never do anything without gaining consent. So with that, I'm going to stop there. There's quite a few worksheets that you get in the packet, and you can take those back and you can work on those. Those are really great opportunities to go through some role plays, to, come up with a scenario yourself. One thing I will say is that it takes practice to do some of these things. And what I like to do is there's role play. So if you want to, go to your spouse or go to someone who you trust and say, hey, I want to learn how to do this. Can I role play? Or the other thing you can do is try it with your best friend. Try it with your husband. Try it. What I hear all the time is these skills work with any person that you're in relationship with. So I would practice them when I would be out for a walk with my girlfriends. So I think it's really great to just think about, and it feels awkward at first, but how can I get better at doing these things? And maybe you break it down and you take one skill at a time and you only focus on validation this week. So instead of, jumping in and telling, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to validate. So that is what we have for today. Next week, we're going to start on ambivalence and talk a little bit about ambivalence and the skills that we can use when someone is ambivalent. And then we'll have a little conversation around positive reinforcement and contingency management, boundaries, and then just wrap this all up. So thank you for allowing me to share today. And I am available for questions as well. My email is going to be in the chat box. And if you guys have any, because we have so much content, it's hard to do Q&A, but if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to me.
Excellent. Thanks, Pam. Let's do our final closing stuff, and then we can open up to questions after we close the recording part. So our last little bits here are our feedback survey. Please let Pam and our technical center know how you found part 2 of the series. The QR code is there. We'll also pop a link into the chat so that you can do that. We'll talk a little bit about the availability of session content, and certificates of attendance will be available as far as after this. So give us about 7 to 10 days after today's session to get the recording available to you. We were able to get it up pretty quick after session 1 onto our YouTube channel and then get it out to you. We'll try and do the same again this week as far as getting it closed captioned and up so that you can watch the recording just to kind of refresh your memory before we see the third and final episode in this series. And then after the entire series is done, again, just give us about 7 to 10 days to get the third one up, get it all posted on the website, and then get certificates of attendance out to everyone. And then as far as ongoing resources, these are the links that we promised you at the beginning. This is our email for the Technical Center, our website, access to our newsletter. We are on Facebook, so if you'd like to connect with us there and get access to our resources, our partner resources, and others that we connect to that we think provide some good feedback and content, you can make connection with us there. And then if you're looking for technical assistance, you can contact us there to fill out a request, and we will get in touch with you. So we'll put those in the chat here in a minute, unless Lauren or Jen have an opportunity to do that before I can get to it. They'll put it in there for you. And then what's up and coming? So, they're in backwards order there, but that's okay. Tuesday, August 6th, we've got Building Impactful Programs using the logic model framework for the program design and outcome measurement. That is being hosted by the University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension. That will be at 10 a.m. Central Time. And then in September, we have the Harm Reduction Gap Implications for Public Health and Medical Providers. That will be Thursday, September 5th at noon Central Time. So those are just some events that we have up and coming. If you're interested, go ahead and join our website, get yourself registered. We'd be happy to see you there again. I'm going to go ahead and stop the share. We'll stop the recording.